welcome, Izzy. Good morning or good afternoon for you over there in the US. And saya akan membacakan sedikit tentang Izzy.
Hi,
So,
everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm very excited that you'll be seeing my documentary during the film festival. And for today, I'm excited to be able to share a little bit of the research behind the film. So thank you,
yeah,
everyone, for being here.
thank you, Izzy. So, I would like to read a little bit background about Izzy. Izzy brought up in Hong Kong and Singapore. Izzy started writing and directing stage plays since Form 2 or US Grade 8. Her senior film project from University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts was screened at film festivals around the world. And Izzy built a successful career in advertising as a strategist and researcher in human behavior, social trends, and popular culture. Brands she has worked with include Apple, Google, Nike, Oakley, and Visa. Izzy's personal struggle as an accidental breadwinner wife is the spark that led to the making of the documentary that we will discuss today. The Big Flip allows Izzy to marry her expertise in audience research to her passion in filmmaking. Mbak Olin?
Ya, jadi akan diingatkan sekali lagi untuk rules-nya, yaitu kita semua akan mute selama presentasi. Video nanti juga tidak akan nampak kecuali untuk panelis. Kecuali nanti di akhir acara akan ada foto session di mana foto semua akan dibuka. Seperti disampaikan Mas Putra, nanti kalau mau ada pertanyaan silakan langsung aja di share pertanyaan terbaik akan mendapatkan pertanyaan dari kita punya penerjemah di sini. Nanti silahkan klik tombol interpretation yang ada di bawah Zoom, contohnya seperti bola dunia. Dan untuk teman-teman yang membutuhkan sign language interpreter bisa dipin JBI juru bahasa isyarat Jasmine dan juru bahasa isyarat Reski. Putra?
Still muted. Thank you so much Mbak Olin. Nanti kita juga akan memilihkan satu best questions dari para penanya dan akan mendapatkan souvenirs dari US Consulate di Medan. Dan untuk memulai acara kita pada pagi hari ini, kita juga kehadiran Public Affairs Officer dari US Consulate General in Surabaya, Ibu Angie Mizer, to give an opening remarks. Ibu Angie, please.
Thank you so much, Putra and Olin. And Izzy, thank you so much for being here. I know it's late where you are, and I cannot tell you how excited I am for this, how personal this is for me as well, and super relevant. So thank you all for joining this wonderful conversation. As Putra said, my name is Angie Mazur. I am the Public Affairs Officer at the U.S. Consulate General Surabaya. So on behalf of the U.S. Consulate General in Surabaya, the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta, and the U.S. Consulate in Medan, I would like to welcome you again to the 2021 Virtual American Film Showcase. I am so happy to be giving these opening remarks for this week-long film showcase, which, as they said, is a celebration of U.S. Independence Day, which is coming up just in, I guess, a week. It's July 4th. But the film showcase, more than just Independence Day, it's also celebrating the diversity and richness of American society and culture through film. And you know, one of the things that I was thinking about with this film showcase is the Declaration of Independence, which is what we celebrate on July 4th. When it was written, it was written by all men, of course. And it starts, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And we can put it in the context of time that, you know, men were the ones doing the working and the revolutionizing or whatever it is then. But that doesn't change the fact that the concept of equality is just so foundational to the United States, and that we continue to work to champion the voices of all and to bring multiple perspectives to the forefront. And I can't think of a better way to do this than through film. And also this film in particular is such a wonderful way to start that journey. You know, over the weekend, my family watched a film that is 85 years old called Top Hat. Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, very famous dancing duo. And we were wondering how long has film been around? You know, we were thinking about that as we were looking at this very old film that's 85 years old, and it's only been about 100 years. And just thinking about how it's evolved from where it was to where it is today, black and white, silent, all the way to these wonderful ways to engage with documentaries. And throughout that whole time, just think about what film has brought us, stories that are both invented and real. They make us laugh, they make us cry, they bring us together, and they make us learn. And film is an art form. And I've said it so many times, but it bears repeating that good art makes you think and discuss with each other what you're experiencing, and it brings you together. And with these 11 films, we bring you art that does exactly that. They have strong viewpoints, they have strong voices about human rights, gender equality, women's empowerment, and unity and diversity. And as I was watching that sequence of films, I just thought, man, these all look like such amazing films, and I can't wait to watch every single one of them with you. So today, as you know, we have Izzy Chan, who has, you know, is this amazing female director who has devoted her life to bringing voices out and constantly raising the voice of women in society. And so, you know, The Big Flip, it is a documentary film, and it's also a true reflection of how domestic roles for men and women can and should grow and become balanced in flexible ways. And as I said at the beginning, this is something that is very personal for me, as well as, I would agree with Izzy, the accidental breadwinner in my family. Sort of navigating that personally, but also societally, seeing that, you know, things have changed from my mom's and my grandma's generation, where the roles were more structured and confined. Now we see this evolution, and we're struggling with it. And I'm really excited to see how this film brings this topic and the conflicts, yes, that arise through the characters, to sort of talk about the dynamic functions going on. It's, yes, entertaining, but it's also a very powerful weapon to bring forth a very important social issue. So, Izzy, again, thank you so much for joining us, staying up late, and being this filmmaker who brings this wonderful perspective on the dynamism of domestic gender roles. So I know that we're going to learn a lot from you, Izzy, as a filmmaker, as a social commentator, as a thinker, as an observer, and we're all going to take those lessons from you and the film forward. And this is, you know, one of the ways that we are excited here in the Bai Mission in Indonesia, that we can see these types of exchanges, these types of discussion it adds so much richness to our relationship between the United States and Indonesia on film, on culture, on society, on gender equity, and, you know, having these open and honest conversations, which is really a hallmark of both of our democracies. So I'm really excited to be here, to listen, to learn. And I hope you, the audience, enjoy this discussion, this film, and all the other films we have in the American Film Showcase. So thank you again so much for being here. Can't wait for this discussion.
Thank you. Should I jump
Yes.
in now?
Yes,
All
yes,
right. Very good, very good. Well, everyone, I'm going to start doing a quick screen share. And thank you to all of you, the audience in the audience, and the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta, all the team at the U.S. Consulate in Medan and Surabaya for having me. There are going to be 3 parts to the talk. The first part, the biggest chunk, I do want to talk about the big flip and share with you the data and the research behind the film. I think together they will give you a very hopefully interesting view into American society and culture. And then we're going to have a Q&A and discussion. I'll stop here and there to ask for that. And then at the end, if we have a bit of time, although I want to give the discussion as much time as it needs, if there is time, I could talk a little bit about my documentary in progress, my new work too. So that's what it would cover. So what is the big flip? Before I dive into the research behind it, maybe the trailer is the best way to introduce the documentary.
Here we go, guys. Because we've
Oke,
Wait for a moment.
Oke, teman-teman, kita akan tunggu, kita akan coba lagi.
Here we go, guys. Because we've got a growing family and my wife works full-time, my role has been to take care of things on the home front.
I earn more, and it's easier for me to earn.
For me to go to work just to pay a babysitter to watch the kid didn't make any sense. Plus, we really didn't want to entrust the first years of our son's life to someone that we didn't know.
I love what I do, so I think, I consider myself successful.
I want to be on our firm's executive committee before I'm 40.
This is the new normal.
I wanted to be in his role. I wish I was doing your job. I know I can do your job, but I didn't have a choice.
Every once in a while you get a little bit of anxiety about money.
There have been a few stares. There aren't a lot of men out there doing this.
You step out of your work, you start to feel like the rest of the world is going to go by. You're going to start to become less good.
All right. So Yeah, so the big flip. It's about this big demographic shift in American society where more and more women are now becoming the breadwinners. And it's a trend that's not just happening in America, but many European countries. In fact, some Nordic countries like Sweden and Norway, it's actually even more common than it is in the US to have women be the breadwinner. But it's also a trend that's slowly actually happening across the world, just at different rates. And that's because women's participation in the workforce and their earnings are rising across the world. So while I know this might seem like just a uniquely American phenomena, I think everywhere across the world, it's something that's happening just at different rates. So I want to go a little bit then into the research behind this to share with you some of the data. For one of the first questions I usually get is why? Why are there more and more women becoming breadwinners? And it's all to do with education. So in the US, in the last number of years, more and more women are going into university. 60% of graduates from universities now are women, so more than men. And it's not just bachelor degrees, it's master's degrees as well. Law school students, which is a more specialized, high end kind of, you could say, high earning profession, over 50% now are also females. And medical school, not quite 50% yet, but it's really quite a major shift to have now almost half of students in med schools be female, because traditionally that's been a very male dominated area as well. And when you know, go to school more, that usually then also eventually equates to higher income. In fact, the Boston Consulting Group, that's a very influential and respected business strategy firm in the US, they predict based on the numbers that they see and the projection they see that by 2028, which is now just another 7 years away, women are projected not just to close the income gap with men, but to out earn men on average. The income gap is about this phenomenon in the US, but I'm sure around the world, where women for the same job, for the same experience, tend to make less than men. So they only make about, for every $10 that a man might make on the same job, a woman might only make $7. So that's the gap. And what's been nice to see is that gap has been closing slowly but steadily for the last, 10, 20 years. And at least according to Boston Consulting Group, by 2028, that gap would not just be closed, but would actually reverse. So the big flip will be the new normal. Now, I will talk a little bit later on how perhaps COVID might affect that. So that seems good news, right, on the gender equity front? Well, not so fast. So I'm going to share some numbers that are not so great about the situation with you. So husbands, this is where their wives make more money, and they don't even have to make it dramatically more. If they make 61% or more, husbands are less happy. Um, Wives who actually are breadwinners also report less happiness on the home front than other women. And later we'll talk a little bit about house chores, because I think that has something to do with it. Men are 5 times more likely to cheat when they are completely dependent on their wife's income. Usually people get pretty surprised about that. When I saw that, I was really, really upset. But the saddest statistic is that divorce is 40% more likely when a woman makes the majority of the income, just 60% or more of the family's income. And so those are the numbers that drove me to make the big flip several years ago, because I was a breadwinner, accidental breadwinner. And while my husband was very supportive of my career, it suddenly started getting stressful and tense in our marriage. And when I saw these numbers as a researcher, I realized, okay, this just confirms my experience, but it doesn't help. It doesn't answer the question, why? Why is this making us unhappy? And more importantly, how can we change this? So to the first question, why? Why are things so tough for big flip families on the home front? the big reason why is social expectations. These are some numbers that show you in America how people still think about mothers and fathers. That the majority still think that children are better off if their mother were at home. And only a small percentage, 34%, think that children are okay if mom is working. Vice versa, when you ask about a dad's role, the majority of Americans don't think there's anything wrong if dad was working. However, only 8% think that children are better off if dad was at home, versus 51% think that children are better off with mom at home. And 9 out of 10 Americans say that providing income is extremely important for a father to do. And these expectations are one of the big reasons why things get stressful. If no matter how much you think you could, march to your own drum beat, if day in, day out, the interactions you get in society make you feel guilty, make you feel ashamed, embarrassed about what you're doing. Oh, yeah, I'm here with the kids in the school as a dad. No, it's not just that my wife happens to have to do something. It's what I do every day. How does one feel? As a woman, if every time I'm at work, especially if I go back to work after having a baby, and everyone keeps asking, oh, your poor kids, what's happening to them while you're at work? And the dad who's coming back after having a baby never gets asked that question. Of course, at some point, I start to feel guilty. Am I neglecting my kids? And I think these expectations are tough because they are not just external. I think there's an element of that that's internal. If this is what you grew up thinking and expecting, that internal sense of guilt and embarrassment, it's hard to overcome. So I think, it's time for us to start changing these perceptions. Because one thing that I hope, when you see the film, and there are lots of stats out there that show this, these perceptions are just not accurate. That's not true. Regardless of whether it's dad or mom who's taking care of the kids, kids do better with the caring parents, regardless of gender. And studies have shown again and again the positive impact of engaged fathers. So there's something about these perceptions that are very old school that we need to start shifting. I want to talk a little bit about COVID's impact, because sometimes, when you look at these numbers, the question then is, how has COVID changed it? And COVID has had a rather complex impact. On one hand, it has reduced the number of working women in the US, because with the closure of schools, what's happened is that more women than men have taken the step back away from their work to take care of things on the home front. And there's a lot of articles out there now where people talk about that right now, in this point in history, it's been since 1986 the lowest percentage of women in the workforce in America. And there's a lot of concern this is going to reverse the progress that we've had in closing that gender pay gap that I was talking about. On the other hand, though, so while more women are stepping back, what's also interesting, because I started looking into how has that affected the number of female breadwinners, is interestingly the study that's out there that's recent that looks at the UK and the US, female breadwinner growth continues. So while more women might have stepped back from work, when it comes to women who earn more than their husbands, that has continued to grow. And that's complicated, and it seems a little odd because very different things are happening at the top and the bottom of different income levels and education levels. And overall, one of COVID's big impact that has changed is there are just less dual working parents. Because of the pressure of having someone to take care of kids, a lot of dual working parents have had to decide one or the other has to take a step back. All right. So any questions so far?
So, Izzy, thank you for the fascinating presentation. I know that it's been happening all over the world, not just in the US, but it's not something that we really talk about openly, right? Usually when you are the breadwinner, you want to hide it. And when you are stay-at-home dad, it's like not something you're proud of. So I think we are proud of the fact that women are earning more and get more opportunities at work, but we're not ready to discuss, what it means being a working mom. So there is, in a sense, like a shame and guilt in both parties, and everyone ended up being less happy. So how do we change that in our societies?
I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked. I have actually a whole bunch of examples to share about some of the conversations happening in America about how we could change this. By the way, on you mentioned something about the guilt and how a lot of us hide it. One of the ways I've seen it that manifest is I've often been brought in to give a similar talk like this at organizations. So one time when I was at Google talking to a bunch of senior women about this topic, and I just thought I'd ask a casual question: how many of you are the breadwinners? And then silence, and one little hand rose up, and then another hand rose up, and these women who know each other for a long time at work look at each other, oh, you too? Oh, you too? It's like all these women knew that they cared about their careers and did well, but nobody really talked about or knew about each other, that they were the breadwinners in their relationships. So it's something that for a long time, like you said, it's very hidden. People don't like to talk too much about it. So how do we change that, right? I'm glad you asked. I'm going to talk about three areas of changes that people are talking about in the US. And I love how from when I first made the film to now, these conversations have really progressed. And I'm going to talk about change at work, change at home, and also change in the marketplace, these three areas. So first, change at work. For a long time, a lot of the talk about work, and gender equity at work, we talk about, oh, women should lean in and speak up and not be afraid to get what they want. So they should lean in and almost be as tough as a man and not be afraid of that. There's also a lot of talk about how companies should support working moms better. So Sheryl Sandberg is a famous, sort of female executive in the U.S. at Facebook, and then Marissa Mayer, who was for a while the CEO of Yahoo and one of the highest paid CEOs. There was a lot of talk when she took that role because she was pregnant when she took that role. So she became kind of a poster child for, oh, companies should support working moms better. And we thought that was the way to achieve gender equity at work. But very quickly, people realize that's actually not having the impact that we want. By calling out female CEOs and trying to focus, support for working mothers, the issue with that is it assumes only women need to worry about work-life balance, that home responsibilities are still on the mom. You don't hear people talking about, let's talk about male CEOs, what they do when they have a baby, but we just start babying, oh, female CEOs, let's talk about work-life balance. Let's talk about what it means to have a baby and be leading a company. And there became this movement that while support working moms seemed like the right place to start, there started to be a lot of talk of how we should actually be talking about supporting working parents, that men also are parents. Men also need work-life balance. Men also need to make time for home responsibilities. And that's why it was a big deal when Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, when he had his first baby, he took 2 months of paternity leave, and he did it quite publicly, talked about how good it was for him and his family and the kind of leadership that he wants to set for Facebook. And that's important because to start talking about how men should take paternity leave and what a difference it makes, it really helps to promote gender equity at work, because it's not just women who has to take care of things on the home front, men too. And that leads us to the second area about change that needs to happen, which is change at home. There's a lot of recognition now that despite big changes from the 50s, where men and husbands now take a lot more responsibilities in the home front, still a lot of the workload fall on the women. And that's why it is tough for women to progress at some point at work because of all the responsibilities they have at home. COVID is a great illustration of that, in that despite all the progress women have made, when push comes to shove and someone has to step back and go home and take care of the kids, it was majority women who did that. And that's something that also I think is part of the reason why breadwinner wives are more stressed, because they still have a fair share, possibly higher share of the home front responsibilities than a typical working dad who has a stay-at-home wife. So how to change that? I love this relationship. At Harvard Business Review is a very respected business journal in America, and one of their latest issues, they actually had relationship advice, like Cosmopolitan does. What you should do at home to make your relationship better, and it's because it knows that for gender equity to work in the workplace, you actually have to start at home. That when men step up more at home, women actually are more likely to be successful at work. And this is where, I mentioned earlier how, so some of these, I know this is a bit of an eyesore. This is a chart from Pew Research Center. So this is about hours mothers and fathers spent on childcare, housework, versus paid work. And there has been dramatic improvements from 1965 to 2011, the study numbers we have, that you could see how the hours that women spend on childcare and housework has reduced from 42 to 32. So that's pretty good. And vice versa, fathers have dramatically increased their hours of childcare and housework from just 6.5 per week in 1965. Now it's 17. So it's almost double. So things have gotten better, right? Men today are not like men in the 50s, but there is still a gap. There is also, interestingly, a perception difference. Another eyesore chart, but once you understand it, it's pretty fascinating. These are perceptions from fathers and from mothers on how equal they share their home responsibilities, or whether mother does more. And you see across the board, for instance, here, managing children's schedules and activities, 41% of dads think that they share it pretty equally. Only 31% of moms agree with that. In fact, 64% of moms think mom does more. Taking care of kids when they're sick. Again, 47% of dads think that they share this pretty equally, but only 35% of women think so. And it goes the same for house chores and responsibilities. That there is this perception gap as well. And so, so what does that mean? This is what I learned from the big flip, and also in my own life, that both sides have faults in this problem, this perception problem. On the one hand, I think fathers, men need to take more ownership. There's one of the things people talk a lot about is how men need to stop asking, what can I do? That the emotional and mental work of talking about what needs to be done and what needs to be done next is a big part of the work of the home front. So men needs to take ownership of it, but also they should have the freedom to tailor what needs to be done at home based on their own strengths and passions. And she, on the other hand, needs to let go of control and give him the space and permission to do things his way. An example from my own life that I'll confess to. So during the pandemic, my husband and I got pretty equal in terms of the home front, and I did a lot of the shopping and whatnot. And then with this year, as work picked back up, we kind of went into more of a big flip role where I'm more of the breadwinner and he takes care of the home front, including a lot of the groceries and the cooking and the child, our daughter. And at first, when we started, I started having this list for him. Oh, I like to get fruits from this farmer. I like to get these vegetables from that farmer. But for these vegetables, I like you to go to this store, and I order the fish from this fishmonger. And I had this long list because I wanted him to do things my way. And he looked at me and go, I will make sure we're fed and we're fed well, and I'm going to do it my way. And I realized, yes, you're right. I learned this from my film, and I need to enact it. I need to let go instead of give him this long list of where to buy things. And that actually is a perfect example of how things can be tough when women also don't let go of how things should be done and their expectations of how a household should be run. So, all right. Any questions before I go to the third part of what could change in the marketplace?
Go ahead, Izzy.
All right. So the third part is I think things need to change in the marketplace. And what do I mean by that? A lot of the products and services we sell, the way we talk about it, the way we share about it, you see a lot of implicit bias that we still expect women, again, to be the one in charge of a lot of the home stuff. So when you see baby changing station signs for toilets in America, for bathrooms where there's a diaper table, you often see just a mom, right, in the symbols. Amazon, which is, I don't know if you have Amazon in Indonesia. It's a big online marketplace for selling stuff. The whole section that they have for kids stuff, when they started, they called it Amazon Mom. How does it feel if you're the stay-at-home dad going to shop at Amazon Mom for the kids stuff? Probably doesn't make you feel good, right? So there was a whole petition to Amazon to actually be more progressive and thoughtful of how moms and dads equally are sharing in the responsibilities of shopping for baby and kids. So in the way we create products and services, we need to be aware of our own implicit bias and how we assume things like diaper bags sometimes are often designed in such a way that a guy doesn't really want to carry them because they're too feminine. So these are things that we need to start thinking about. We also need to change the stories we tell, whether it's in advertising or in films. In America, a lot of times there is this image that we like to make this joke of the dad, the bumbling dad, the dad who doesn't know anything. And when he's the one taking charge of the kids, good luck with that. The house will be a big mess. So this is an example of that. Huggies had a campaign a number of years ago that's like, our diapers are so amazing, even dads can mess it up. And these are the stories that reinforce the idea that dads are not good at taking care of kids. And it doesn't make dads who are doing that role feel good about it. And these are the things that we want to change. That's part of my reason for making the big flip is changing, the stories we tell and the images we send about what defines a good dad and what defines a good mom. And changing the products we sell, making sure that baby products, home care products are also catered to males as much as to females are important in changing a lot of the social antiquated perceptions that dads should be the one working and moms should be the one at home. So with that, I think that is the bulk of what I have to share about the big flip, the research and things we could do to make things better. Let's talk. I'm going to start screen share so we can see each other's faces.
Thank you, Izzy, for the presentation. So we have one question actually in the chat from Johannes in Surabaya. He would like to ask, could you please share some tips based on your own experience to deal with dad's guilt for having less or even no income in a family, such as in Indonesia, especially in Surabaya, job position is man's dignity. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that. I'm so glad you asked that. One of the things that I have noticed, so when you watch the film, for instance, you'll notice that a lot of the dads did go through that emotional journey of at first, feeling a little uncertain, feeling a little bit embarrassed. And when things finally flip is when they started tailoring the role to their own passions and to their own strengths. That being the one who is not, rather than focusing on how much money you bring, is focusing on what you do on the home front. That being the one that takes care of your family's happiness on the home front is like any other job out in the workplace that I feel like workers do best when they figure out how to do that job in a way that gives value to the team, but at the same time speaks to their personal interests and passions. So for instance, Chip, who is one of the dads we feature in the film, he he cooks a little bit and does the home stuff, but where his real passion is making sure that his kids have a rich social life and it's very embedded in the society, in the community. So he would organize all kinds of neighborhood stuff. He would organize music, things for the block, and all the neighbors would be there. And when he started doing more and more things, and he realized that is part of his role as the at-home dad and the family center of happiness, he started enjoying it a lot. and figuring out also how to define it in a way that makes sense. My husband, we call him the chief happiness officer of our family. So I think rather than focusing on income is how do you embrace the role you have and define it and do it in a way that gives you a sense of pride, and it's tailored to what your strengths are.
Thank you, Izzy. So we have another question. Let me read it. A question from Satria Wibawa. So he said, breadwinner is also in Indonesia, mostly it's about culture. Traditionally, culturally, woman is positioned at home, taking care of the kids. Unfortunately, it's not about the choice of rational thinking. And also there are situations that despite the breadwinner is the mother, they also still take more proportion for taking care of the kids at their working hour. So the question is, do you think this will be the new trend or only because there is an economic situation when female gets more opportunity in the workplace? And also I can imagine this happens in the countries that have strong patriarchy culture.
Yes, I mean it's a problem in the U.S. too, actually, still, right? That in the study I reference, even though in post-COVID times, the female breadwinner situations talk about the stress of being breadwinner, but still doing a lot of the work. I think it's not easy to change things from, like you said, when you are have been in a patriarchal society that's been like that for a very long time, and it's part of the tradition. So it has to happen on many fronts. Part of it, like I said earlier, is society needs to change the stories we tell and the images we share. I think the more images we show of dads being cool dads, and the more images we show that women can be working, but it doesn't mean they're scary and they're bossy, that they could be breadwinners in their own way. That helps, I think, a lot. And one more thing I will add is that the conversation, one of the things that's happening in the US that I really like is this movement called He for She. So it's actually men coming together and trying to promote gender equity, that they're not just following, that they're doing a lot of proactive pushing for it. The Harvard Business Review article I mentioned earlier, they're from a bunch of writers from Harvard Business Review that are creating a book about how men can be allies for gender equity at home and at work. So that's another way it could happen, is rather than just waiting for people around, it's like, yeah, I'm going to be part of the movement. And you don't have to be a woman to be a feminist. If you have a mother, if you have daughters, if you have sisters, this is something that you could also be a champion for.
Thank you, Izzy, and what a great question. Actually, we will discuss it in the next session of the presentation, but we have a lot of more questions. I will ask one more question before Mbak Olin asks one more question too, and then we move on to the other part. So one question from Sri Wahyuni in Jakarta. She is asking, is this economic changing is also give an impact to the relationship of the couple, like in the number of like sexual violence in the house?
Yes. So what is the question exactly?
So does this bring any change in the number of the violence in the house because of like the economic status and the economic position between the man and the woman in the house is changing?
You're talking about the big flip, or
yeah,
so
yeah, the big flip.
With a big flip, from what I'm aware of, not exact. It's not a clear-cut thing. Let's put it that way. So when the things that I've shared, I'm talking about breadwinner wives in a very broad sense. There is actually a class difference. It's happening on the highly educated and the affluent group, because women are getting more educated. So the example I gave of, engineers, female engineers in the US, right, being breadwinners. So in that scenario, no, I don't think there is anything to do with any kind of increased, even though there's unhappiness, there isn't an increase in violence at home and domestic violence. Now, the other front where it's happening is on the lower middle class, the blue collar, right? That one of the reasons early on, now it's a little different, is why there are a lot of breadwinners in the working class is, especially after 2008 in America, a lot of men, a lot of working class men were losing their jobs. So it's a very different scenario, right? Where the woman is the breadwinner, and she actually, and when you're in the lower class, the income gap is usually wider. So you're the breadwinner working a blue collar job, and getting paid less than other blue collar men doing the same job, and you're trying to support your family, and your husband might not be happy with the situation. I don't have statistics about it, but I know anecdotally and from my understanding of the situation that it's a lot more tense in those environments. So it's very different. So it's not about does it happen in big flip families, but once you get into that, the issues we're talking about isn't just about the gender role reversal. There are a lot of other issues. There are issues usually with access to support. There's issues about education. There's issues about affordable housing. It's a whole host of other issues, and the gender role reversal is just a small part of a lot of the factors that make things difficult in those households.
So Izzy, we still have a lot of questions, but I heard from the grapevines that you are working on a project that one of them takes place in Indonesia. We would love to hear what you're working on next.
Sure, I would love to. So, I am currently working on a project. Let's see, let me share the screen on that, and I will go to the next slide for this. It's a documentary series, it's still in progress. It's called Matriarch, and it's a project that as I finished Big Flip and I started looking at things, one of the things that started really intriguing me is how is life different in societies where women have always been in the lead? So I started researching it, thinking of how to tell these stories in a way that's interesting. And I ended up deciding to focus on four matriarchies around the world that have been around for a long time, very different. And one of those four is the Minangkabau in West Sumatra in Indonesia. And I'm just interested in learning from these societies, from the research, right? Just doing the book research that I've done. One of the fascinating things that I learned, that's hard because even though I think of myself as a feminist, the truth is I grew up in a patriarchy. I look at things from a patriarchal perspective, like it or not. So I have to rewire my brain to understand all these matriarchies. Because one of the first things I learned is matriarchies are not the reverse of patriarchies, with men on top, with women on top and in charge and dominating. It's not female dominated. It is female centered and motherhood centered. So it's a very different thing. And one of the things perhaps that might help, because I have started shooting, even though we're not yet done, far from being done. I'm happy to give everyone a sneak peek at a trailer that I have just for this group. It's a little treat, so you can see what we've shot so far and why I think it's an interesting topic.
I play the trailer, right?
Yes, please.
Tulis di chat lagi ya. Selain itu juga teman-teman yang butuh penerjemahan bahasa Indonesia, silakan klik tombol interpretation. Di sini juga ada 2 juru bahasa isyarat, yaitu Reski dan Jasmine. Silakan di spotlight kalau membutuhkannya.
No problem. Hopefully from the trailer, if once you see it later, you'll get a peek into sort of all these different matriarchies and the respect that they have for the elderly, for the land, and also for children. And the thing that I do, want to share that was one of the most interesting initial learnings I had is when I first started going to visit these matriarchies and started filming. So the first place I went to was the Mosuo in China. I couldn't put my words to it, but I was a little disappointed. I was a little bit like, huh? This is it? And when I came back, and I talked to one of my academic advisors who has studied this a long time, she asked, "What do you mean? Why are you disappointed?" It's like, I don't know. Women were I saw women doing a lot of the domestic stuff, like taking care of kids, taking care of the elderly, and cooking. And it's like, okay, and what were you expecting them to do? It's like, I don't know, just more, like, be in charge, be in positions of authority and power, and telling people what to do. And she said, was anyone doing that? Is anyone bossing anyone around and telling them what to do? Were there men doing that? And I said, actually, no. The men were also taking care of the kids and taking care of the elderly. And somehow things get done without someone telling everyone. It was a lot of good discussion. And it's true, actually, the matriarch is the one that facilitates a lot of the conversations and listens to everyone and guides the decisions. But she wasn't telling people what to do. She was just listening and guiding. And I realized, oh, wow, yeah, as a feminist, I'm still looking at the world from a patriarchal perspective. For me, things like cooking and taking care of kids were domestic stuff. They were trivial, and I, like any good child of patriarchy, only cared about power. Who has it? Who doesn't have it? And matriarchies are just very different. And one of the things I noticed is the article I mentioned earlier, about how there are lots of articles now in the US talking about how, as women step back during COVID to take care of kids and the family and the elderly sometimes too, that they've lost so much. That article in the New York Times was "What Women Lost," and I am concerned about that. But what I'm also uncomfortable with now that I've started studying matriarchies is how the basic assumption of those articles is that when you take a step back to the home front and take care of kids, you're stepping down in the social hierarchy. You're less. And sadly, it's true in the US. But I now know that it doesn't have to be that way, that there are different ways of structuring a society, that when you do that, you don't become less. And that's something that I'm trying to figure out, what kind of lesson can we learn from these matriarchies.
Hi, Izzy.
Yes.
It's ready now.
All right. Perfect. Now that I've shared like some of the lessons, like let's take a look at the trailer. All right. So hopefully that gives you a glimpse of what these different matriarchies look like. I think the one last thing I did want to share is this quote from one of my advisors, that is something that I'm still grappling with, that in the end, in trying to study about matriarchies, thinking of what it means, to live in a place where women were always in charge, the lesson is actually we really shouldn't care about who's in charge, male or female. That matriarchies are actually societies that are centered on working on behalf of equality and equity for the children, taking care of everyone in the society, and taking care of the land. And that is actually something that is so beautiful, that I'm learning, that this is not about whether it's men in charge or women in charge, but a whole different way of structuring and the value system of a society that's focused on protecting the world for future generations. And so hopefully that gives you a little taste of this next project I have. Do you have other questions? How are we doing on time?
Thank you so much, Izzy. We still have 25 minutes, so that's plenty of
Oh,
time, thankfully, because we have tons of questions and we have someone saying
wow.
hi to you. He's Gun from North Sumatra, but working in West Sumatra as your videographer in this project, Matriarch. So yes,
Gun?
so he's in the panel as well. Fee Gun. So
Um,
we will mention these questions to you. But first, me being selfish, I have one question for
yeah.
you first regarding matriarch. So I see that, from these societies that you are highlighting, all of them are traditional societies. So is matriarchy only happens in traditional society, and what happens to that community as they become modern society? Because I saw from your last slide from Peggy's quote, she wrote a book called Life in Modern Matriarchy. So what does modern matriarchy looks like?
I'm glad you asked that because one of the arguments people have is, do matriarchies only work in agrarian, like more agricultural type societies that are more sort of small scale. And one of the reasons when I selected different communities, why I selected the Minangkabau, I think they're a great example of a matriarchy that's still very, very much now a part of a thriving modern society. Like when the family that I'm following, and I think in that general area, Minangkabau are one of the most successful matriarchies out there. They are the Minangkabau. Are a lot of them are quite important business magnates and important political leaders in many different Southeast Asian countries. And I think they're a great example to show that matriarchies don't have to be in these small agrarian type societies, that there's a way to hold on to those tradition but still be very much part of a successful modern educated society that's very embedded in modern life. And by the way, since we started talking about matriarchy, I don't know if they're in the audience. Maybe that's who you were talking about. Maybe some of my friends, Leah. I have had so many amazing help from my Indonesian friends and Minangkabau friends. There's Leah, there's Eru, who is my guide and translator throughout. Um, and I don't know if my family, my Nene and her family is part of the, I don't know if they managed to join, but if they are, I just want to say hello and thank you for being here.
Hi, Easy. So thank you so much for that interesting story about your next project. I'm actually a Minangkabau guy. I grew up in the
Yes.
Minangkabau culture. So it's really nice someone's bring up about my culture and talk about that particular issues. And actually, Gan, the one in the chat mentioned he lives in North Sumatra, but he works in West Sumatra. He applied for your videographer for your project, Matriarch.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and he asked question. Actually, it's about like the protection because the concept of breadwinner in matriarch culture like Minangkabau, it's a little bit different with the modern society, because as you mentioned earlier, they're still taking care of the domestic house chores, and for them it's not an extra, it's just what they want to do too. And then the man in that culture is also sometimes being protective, like a protection. They can be a breadwinner, but like in some of the like job only, it's not like the heavy job, it's like not the dangerous job as a breadwinner, but they can do and work outside of their house. So do you think there is a correlation between like there's a concept of breadwinner in a matriarch traditional community to a modern community, do you think?
I think that's a good question. One of the things I noticed, and that's a little bit more in some of the other matriarchal cultures that I noticed, is that because what happens on the family front in terms of how you manage the land and how you manage the house is actually such a big part of the family's financial well-being, and the job per se of working outside and bringing money in, it's a nice extra, but it's actually not the main resource that keeps the family fed. It's just extra. And I think that has something to do with it too. So for instance, in Mosuo, even though where on the surface it seems like in a patriarchal society, as in the men are the ones who go to the city sometimes to do jobs, do driving stuff and drive tourists, and the women are at home, but it doesn't mean they're in more positions of power, because the money they bring is just a small part of the family's well-being. How the family decides when to what to do with the land, who to hire for tilling the land, when, what cows, what sheep, what goats to buy, when to slaughter them, and how to sell them and how much to eat. That's the majority of the income for the family, and those are the decisions that the women make. So I think that's a very good point, in that there is a difference when the land and the house and is such a big part of the family's source of well-being.
Yeah, thank you so much, Izzy. Actually, in the chat, Nene also say hello to you. Eru Mama is in the chat.
Oh, yay! And Eru Mama, oh, I'm so happy.
Yeah, it's so exciting, Izzy, about your project, and we hope we can watch it here also in Indonesia once it's finished, because the project is interesting. As you mentioned, a lot of modern society have a different understanding too, in understanding us, the matriarch culture, like the house where we live with our mother's family, like we are close to our mother's brother, like the uncles and everything.
Yes.
Like the concept of like the breadwinner is managing the land, managing the field, but it's not basic per se working in the rice field, but they're the one that managing it. So that's very interesting. Baolin, do you have questions?
We can move on to the questions from the audience, because there's lots of.
Yes. Okay. So we have a lot of other questions from audience. Izzy. So from Daddy Afrosi is asking, sometimes my daughter asks me why mom goes to work and you, dad, stay at home and play with me all day long. How to answer this question, and for vice versa?
Sure. I think, it's like the way I would do it is not think about it in terms of gender, but more as in a division of labor, right? Aren't you glad that you have someone, whether it's mom or me, that is actually taking care of you? And isn't it? And right now, based on where we are in life, we've decided that the person that's best for taking care of things at home is me, and that the one who is best fit for working is mom. And things might change later, but I think the important thing is between mom and dad, we both together are making sure that the family is well taken care of, that one of us is making sure that we have the financial income that we need to make sure we get the food we need, and one of us is also getting to stay home and take care of you. And I think that's the important thing, that you try to make sure your kid understands that it's a teamwork. I kind of have the same thing here, right? And I cannot do what I do without my husband. My husband is the one taking care of the home front. He's the chief happiness officer, and the fact that I happen to be the one working doesn't mean I'm the one. Like that, it's there's no way I could do this if he wasn't taking care of things. So it's a team. How do you divide and who does what best at this moment in time?
So Izzy, sorry to interject, Putra, but do you think that it would be a good starting point for that kind of discussion to have with the next generation? Because we are a product of parents who instill in us that, you know, you as a girl, you must learn as high as possible and work in a good position, but you still have to take care of the kid, and your husband must earn more than you, which is like a very tall order to actually make happen.
Yeah, yes, I think the key lesson isn't about whether it should be a man or a woman doing X or doing Y. It's as a family, regardless of gender, who does what better, and what's happening out there in the world in the economy, and who is so what is the best thing for us as a family, because we're a team, right? So based on what's going on, what's available for work, who is better at taking care of kids at what age, let's think of what's best. And that hopefully what we're teaching our kids is that's the right way to make decisions, that you always focus on the family's happiness. Don't let outside old beliefs restrict what you think you should do. Always try to decide as a family what will make your family happiest.
Thank you, Izzy. So we have another question from audience from Sri Wahyuni. She asked, does the tradition of matriarch culture will change in modern society, especially digital world takes part in feeding society about gender equality?
Definitely. I think, one of the urgency when I talk to the scholars and the advisors who are studying this, I see two camps, let's put it that way. There is definitely those who are worried that part of this global culture with the phones and the internet that we have, everything has its good and bad side, right? It definitely has brought us all closer. But one of the downside is that it's affecting some of these cultures, because the majority of the stuff you see on the phone and the internet, without us realizing it, is from patriarchal cultures. So it does impact them, and there is concern about that. But I also love how some of my scholars, so it's interesting. I have a whole team of advisors, and some of them feel very protective, and they say, oh, things should be this way, and it's already changing so much already, that's bad. And then I have another group of my advisors that I kind of do agree with is there is no such thing as a static culture. For any culture to stay vibrant, it has always had to adapt and shift with the times. And the same with a lot of these matriarchies. They have had to adapt and change, and it doesn't mean that they are not true anymore. So I guess the fact that these matriarchies have survived that long, I have some faith that they will continue to hopefully be resilient. One of the lessons, I think, learnings that I'm taking from these four matriarchies is the importance of being able to flex and adapt and be part of modern times. And part of why they have stayed resilient is their ability to hold contradictions. That we are actually part of the tension we see around the world right now is people's inability to hold contradictions and be at peace with it, right? That if you don't agree with me, then you're bad, and people are fighting it out. And part of these matriarchies that have survived for so long is they have this ability of holding opposing things without breaking. So I guess it's my way of saying I think yes, matriarchies are changing, but matriarchies have always been changing. And I have faith that they are going to hopefully be able to retain the core of what they care about and the core values, even as they adapt and shift.
So easy. One last question from audience. Sharafina, referring to the big flip, mother as breadwinner. Does this make the children mental condition different or change compared to father as the breadwinner?
I actually, that's a very good question. I do think, especially at the beginning when I was making this documentary, some of the questions I get from audiences are kids all right? Because some of the traditionalists, right, do worry that, oh my God, what's going to happen to kids if dad is the one in charge? Oh, poor kids. And I can tell you from my experience, from watching those families and from my personal experience watching my husband, the kids are not just going to be fine, they're going to be great. I think kids do well when there is a caring parent. That's very important. And whether it's the man or the woman at home, it's not really the part that makes a difference. There are, from psychological studies, anecdotal differences. Whether it's a mom that's more the one doing the parenting than the dad, that having a dad at home actually has quite a beneficial impact on daughters, especially because traditionally, these are anecdotal psychology studies, but because traditionally the way our culture has been, girls tend to be more risk averse. When a dad is the one doing the parenting, kids, especially daughters, tend to have more ability to take risks, which could also be related to success in life later, right? And I kind of see it anecdotally in the way I'm always like, don't do this, don't do that, you're gonna fall, don't hurt. And my husband is like, oh, let her fall, she's gonna be fine, and she's, let her do what she wants to, give it a try, it doesn't hurt. And I could see how, yeah, she's gonna be a little bit more courageous and take more risks maybe than she would if I was the one being there all the time.
Yeah, I said one last question, but one more actually to follow up that answer. Like from Devi Ekasari from Sidoarjo in East Java, in patriarchy society, male get more chances than female, and matriarchy, female get more power than male. So how is your opinion about patriarchy and matriarchy culture towards gender equality?
So I want to point out, and that's something in matriarchies, women don't dominate the way men tend to in patriarchies. They are more equitable in decision making, in distribution of goods. So there is actually, I think, now, of course, every culture is different, so I do want to point that out. But generally speaking, it is more equitable. There's better equality, that women, that in matriarchies, men are not lesser, they just do different, they have different roles. And so that I think is one of the things that I noticed, that a lot of the scholars who study matriarchies for a long time would talk about this thing called the sharing economy. So this is where things get messy, because also patriarchies often tend to be more of a capitalist society. So you're talking also about capitalism too, where we're in a place that values profit and competition and winning, and winner takes all, versus in a lot of the matriarchies, they tend to have an economy that's a sharing economy, that there's more equitable distribution. It's a gift economy, that people tend to if you do, want to make sure that things get distributed around and gets shared around. Now, that said, not every matriarchy is like that. So for instance, I do know amongst the Khasi in India, they are one of the only matriarchies I know where they have a strong men's movement to try to counter the matriarchal tradition, that there is a men's movement that believe that, but this is very different than women's equality movements in patriarchies, because the Khasi men's movement are affected more by the patriarchal culture of the dominant Indian culture. So their movement is about returning men to the rightful place as the head of household. So it's a little bit different than so while some people call them, oh, it's the male suffrage movement, like using the same language that we talk about women's equality movements in the West and in patriarchies, it's actually quite different. But there is some dissatisfaction, and some of the dissatisfaction they talk about do point to some inequality they feel. They talk about how, amongst their family as a men, they feel that they're less respected because sooner or later they're going to be married off to a different family. And then when they join the wife's family, they're always going to be seen as the outsiders. So I'm not saying everything is perfect and rosy. You probably know from the big clip, I like to point out the good and the bad. So while there generally are a lot of good lessons to learn, it's not perfect either.
Thank you, Izzy. And one comment, no question from audience, from Lia Lenggogeni, that I agree as someone from matriarch culture in Minangkabau. Not a question, just want to comment that coming from a matriarchal society and living in a majority patriarchal one is an interesting juggling act, because it's just different between our culture and the majority what people and modern days think. So I think that's all the question from audience. Baolin, do you have?
Thank you so much, Izzy. It has been a fruitful and insightful discussion. I agree with your last conclusion that it's not about who wins and who gets the power, but how do we make sure that everyone is taken care of, and it might take us being more adaptable and flexible to what's happening, in our modern society. And we still have like a lot of questions that are unanswered, but unfortunately we are out of time. But for you guys who wants to watch the record of this discussion, you can go to the Facebook of US Consulate Medan and US Consulate Surabaya to see the recording. And we are going to launch a polling shortly untuk teman-teman. Kita sebentar lagi kita akan polling, habis itu kita akan announce winnernya. Jadi tunggu sampai selesai polling. Habis itu kita akan foto bersama untuk kenang-kenangan. Oke, Puguh udah bisa di launching nih pollingnya.
Oke.
Nah, ini udah muncul teman-teman, boleh di klik aja nih jawabannya, cuma 7 dan semuanya pilihan ganda, jadi langsung spontan aja.
I want to say hi, Leah. I'm so glad you made it, and I hope Nana is still around. I can't wait to come back and see you. And Eru, thank you. I really miss, the COVID travel moratorium has been really tough.
Okay, Izzy, we once again we're very much looking forward to you coming to Indonesia and to Sumatra.
Me too. Thank you, everyone. I'm delighted and honored, and I look forward to coming back.
Okay, udah lengkap Puguh pollingnya?
Not yet, still 19 out of 43, so we are still waiting.
Oke teman-teman, diisi dulu pollingnya sebelum kita foto bareng dan pengumuman pemenangnya. So from Eru Mama says that she is hoping to see you shortly.
Thank you, me too.
Oke, sembari kita menyelesaikan polling, Putra mungkin bisa di-announce 3 winnernya. Nanti untuk winnernya silakan DM alamat email dan nomor kontaknya ya ke panelis.
Ya, kita akan mengumumkan 3 penanya terbaik untuk teman-teman yang disebutkan. Bisa langsung approach kita untuk memberikan seperti Mbak Olin tadi sebutkan. Jadi penanya terbaik ada, sebentar saya lihat dulu. Ada Sri Wahyuni, kemudian ada Yohanes Kurniawan, dan juga Syafa Vina. Jadi Sri Wahyuni, Yohanes Kurniawan, dan Syafa Vina. Untuk ketiga nama tersebut, boleh nanti menghubungi kami untuk memberikan alamat email dan nomor kontak untuk koordinasi pengiriman merchandise dari Konsulat AS di Medan.
Terima kasih banyak untuk tim JBI dan tim penerjemah yang sudah membantu mendukung. And absolutely thank you Izzy for being with us today. Jangan lupa teman-teman bisa akses 11 film yang akan ditayangkan di platform Eventif selama 8 hari mulai dari hari ini sampai tanggal 4 Juli. Filmnya keren-keren. Kalau mau tahu gimana cara daftarnya, silahkan lihat di Instagram dan sosial media outlet kita yang lain. Nanti bisa dapat akses ke semua filmnya dan dapat akses ke semua diskusinya, linknya. Oke, Pugu kita udah ready?
Till 80%?
80%. Okay, 20 more to go. Ya, persilakan mungkin Bu Angie. Bu Angie, would you like to say something or comment to wrap up our discussion?
Sure. I would love to, actually. This was so interesting. And in fact, my husband was also listening as we were sort of doing the program and getting things in the house situated with the kids and the kitchen and everything. And he's like, can we watch this again where we can really focus on it? And I said, yes, we're recording it. So anyone who wants to watch it again, please go and find the recording. Just there were so many insights from the audience. I mean, just questions like, yeah, that's a really good question. And the whole comment about, thinking through a patriarchal lens, that Izzy said, like, why are they still doing, the housework? Why aren't they taking charge? It's like, yeah, I never thought of it that way. I mean, these like mind twisting questions that really make you want to think and take the time to discuss even more. So thank you all really for joining and for listening and for asking such insightful and thought-provoking questions. Really, really something that you can take to heart and take to your own day-to-day and to those around you. Like, I think you were talking about the idea of allyship as well, and that is something that's been really important and can be important. Like, what can I do? What can I do as a man? What can I do? When I see these things happen, being an ally is so important as well. So really thank you all for just so many things that have caused my brain to start really turning this morning as well. So we really want you to see the film. Yes, I saw a question, when is Matriarch coming out? I want to know the answer too, because I'm like frantically texting people, oh my God, this movie's going to be coming out too. We have to get this person to watch it, this person to watch it.
Well, the best answer I could give is sign up for our newsletter. It's hard to say. I have on the website 2013. I don't think that's happening. COVID kind of put a whole hiatus on filming. So because it's a documentary series, it's taking a little longer. So maybe 2014. Maybe 2014.
We will be waiting whenever it comes out for sure, because it looks amazing. And there's just so much in there for our daughters and sons, for everyone moving forward. So thank you really, Izzy, for spending so much time with our audiences. I know that they really enjoyed it. I can tell that so genuinely. And thank you, audience, for joining. Please go watch the film. Please watch the other films. We have other discussions set up as well on some of the films. So please go check out all the information, sign up, join. I know I will be. And really wonderful that we could help bring this conversation to light, these films to you. So thank you all again. And Izzy, again, thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Bu Angie. So before we end this event, we would like to take a photo. So to our audience, boleh dibuka dulu kameranya. Jadi kita akan mengambil foto, grup foto untuk teman-teman audiens. Jadi kita meminta teman-teman audiens untuk membuka kameranya karena kita akan berfoto bersama. Bagaimana teman-teman?
Oke, sementara kita menunggu kameranya untuk dibuka. Jadi terima kasih banyak sudah bergabung di hari Sabtu pagi yang mendung ini. Kalau di Medan sih mendung ya, dan rintik-rintik, nggak tahu kayak yang di Jakarta, Surabaya, atau di Padang. Yang jelas kita bakal ada 3 diskusi lagi nih yang paling cepat setelah ini hari Selasa jam 7 malam. Judulnya Learning from Losers. Jadi filmnya ini bisa ditonton di platform Eventif, di acara kita maupun di Netflix. Jadi kalau yang punya Netflix udah bisa nonton terus bisa nanya nih ke sutradaranya langsung. Losers itu juga series ya. Jadi banyak nih opsi untuk penontonnya. Udah terbuka semua kah?
Bagaimana sudah buka? Tadi ada satu Sri Wahyuni bilang kameranya broken, bermasalah. Tidak apa-apa, mungkin teman-teman yang kameranya nggak broken, nggak apa-apa. Bisa pakai filter juga biar kita bisa berfoto bersama juga. Oke. Kebanyakan akses kameranya belum bisa, jadi kita foto speaker moderator saja dulu. Ada audiens yang mau buka kamera? Kita tidak memaksa juga.
Dari host harus buka dulu mungkin Kak Putra untuk kasih
boleh.
akses. Ya. Dari Uguh bisa dikasih akses semuanya untuk menyalakan kamera.
Oke Mbak Wid.
AS di Medan, Syarafina dan juga Sri Wahyuni sudah mengirimkan kontak informasinya. Jadi Yohanes Kurniawan, kita tunggu untuk mengirimkan konfirmasi kontak informasi dan juga alamat email ke all panelists. Jadi kita nanti bisa berkoordinasi untuk pengiriman merchandise. Bagaimana dari host sudah?